sweet to have like people who are a bit younger actually have enough faith to want to offer something. So that's been especially nice, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you have kids offering, it very sweet experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if any of the people who offer us food, if you also want to have your kids offer, you can do that too. It's very nice to get them involved, and we're happy to receive from them. That's how it's done in Thailand, isn't it?
Yeah, they'll have the parents will bring their baby and then sort of guide their hand into the bowl, and yeah, kids are brought up giving, and it has a pretty profound effect. Like I don't know if people realize how deeply ingrained Buddhist culture is in Thailand, but say perhaps a quarter of the Thai language is based on Pali. It's been interwoven for so long, and I think it's no accident. It's like known as the land of smiles because of this sort of foundation, and just having these like core of monastic teachers at the center of society has profound ripples. Like the king, would routinely consult these attained teachers, and when the military was trying to figure out a proper response to the communist insurgency, they consulted Ajahn Chah and others, and their reaction was attenuated immensely by that. So they had a policy for a long time of, at least in some periods, of amnesty, where they would like meet the communist rebels in the forest and sort of just show them their radios and all these things. And yeah, and I just think the ripples of having that sort of presence of teachers like Ajahn Chah, it's immense, and it begins as kids just with giving every day. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of thinking about how Buddhist peace can be spread through war.
Mm,
During wartime,
yeah.
it's quite a special thing. It's interesting how to how something like that is dealt with in society, such a negative thing, but with Buddhist
A
values.
degree of grace. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really something. Um, yeah, so I don't think we're quite up to the point in America of having our presidents consult monks and teachers, but could happen.
Someday,
Could happen.
someday, maybe mayors.
There's- we'll work up from there.
Yeah. So if anybody has any questions for us, we'd be happy to say something, comments, considerations, suggestions,
We could respond to the
anything.
emoticons, but I don't actually know what that one is. So,
That's an elbow tap.
oh, is that a thing?
I don't know. I just recognize it. That's them saying hello to each other without. I mean, you're
Oh,
social distance
it's a
enough
COVID
though.
it's a COVID emoticon.
Yeah,
This is good to know.
it's a COVID
We
emoticon.
haven't started that yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Dave asks, "Hello, Venerables. If our karma has no bad intent, but still has negative impact, do we reap effects of this? Example, buying and discarding non-biodegradable packages or electrical use." Ajahn?
It's a good question. We could say that the comma is well, first of all, commenting on comma is quite difficult. So that's something you should know, that um, in a situation where somebody's saying like, well, this is what the comma would be. I mean, it's almost, the Buddha said that was a very special person, and said in fact he said he's the only one, like a Buddha can really know the incredible depths of karma, whereas like an arahant might know some. So commenting about it is important for me to say that, in terms of like my stating like yes and no. It's so complicated that as the Buddha said, your head would explode in terms of trying to contemplate it. So what the Buddha speaks about though, is that when the intention is not there, that's based on, sort of, that we'd say negative attention, like based on greed or hatred, or delusion, then it's not going to have a very strong impact. But if one's doing things with a sense of not knowing, like, or not thinking, that I think does have a comic effect. So when one actually goes ahead and does things in a manner that's not really well thought through, or one's not mindful. So maybe you could address this with like saying something you regret later on in front of someone where you actually didn't have any intent of harm at all, but you said something that was sort of a blunder. And that blundering mind actually does have a comic effect, but it's not the same as it would be based on an intent of like I said, ill will or like greed. But there can be delusion involved in that. So that's sort of the way I'm thinking about it, is like once one recognizes, oh, there's something I actually could do here that's positive, that's lending my not mind to being more sort of fully awake, present, mindful, then that's the kind of karma that increases when one sees like, oh, my intent wasn't to do anything negative, but I see I could do something more positive in the future.
Yes, yes, I agree, Ajahn. I think the pointing to delusion is a good uh, route into the given example of sort of a careless act. Um, you know, they say this. So the three root sort of defilements spoken of in Buddhism are greed, hatred, and delusion. And intention motivated by any of these three will lead to kama. Whereas an action undertaken without those intentions will not, because intention is the key ingredient in the Buddhist conception. But teachers also speak about the greed and aversion are the two arms of delusion. So, and one practitioner once asked Ajahn Chah, he said, look, I see greed and delusion at work, but I can't see, sorry, I see greed and aversion at work, but I don't see delusion. And Ajahn Chah famously said, you're riding on a horse and asking where the horse is. So all that to say that I think when our intentions are motivated by aversion and greed, it's very visible. But with, say, a sort of active carelessness or delusion, it is harder to see. So if buying and discarding non-biodegradable packages, say, like, there's a difference between just not knowing, the damage one is doing, say, and if one did have sort of some idea of that, and that was a strong value one held, and one sort of crushed it anyways and did it, then there's definitely some karma there. You're compromising your values and who you really believe you are. And in the Buddhist, in the monastic code, like that phrase is used quite a lot to denote the line at which point an offense is crossed, as one crushes with his mind. So, you sense something and then delusion crushes it, like it's an active intention, even though it can kind of mimic not knowing, it's not. And I think we only really become sensitive to that distinction as we meditate. And then you see that delusion isn't this sort of empty blankness. It's actually a very active force that clouds something, and you can kind of feel it. So anyways, all that to say that, yes, if something's undertaken with delusion, even though it might be less visible, then there's definitely still karmic effect. But if it's just, carelessness based on not knowing better, then no, because there's no intention, I think. Arjun? Yeah?
I think yeah, it's possible. Like I said, that it's hard to tease apart exactly, but one can do something that has a negative impact. That's an example, without delusion operating, but still, there's something about like the habits that we build, and how some of those habits can kind of increase the potential towards delusion. And so that's what I'm thinking about, is like just not thinking about something, and then it eventually does lead to something that's not it's not going to necessarily have an impact on one's life in terms of like creating very negative karma, but it can kind of lead one towards bad habits in a way, like sort of not opening your eyes to seeing things bigger. I mean, that's what I think, like if we talk about like what's happening in the country right now in the US, and how people are talking about how we relate to all kinds of things: class, ethnicity, and the fact that it doesn't. We can kind of be interacting or partaking in a particular mode of the way that things are established in society, but not really know it and not even have an understanding that we are. And so sometimes that can go too far in trying to explain the sort of all the intricacies of that, but sometimes it is true and of value to kind of say, like, to kind of think about, oh, what am I taking for granted in my experience and situation that I'm not really seeing clearly through. And so it's pretty subtle, but I do think that there's always a sense of kind of a gray area where one does look at one's own sort of ignorance of things and seeing how that's affecting the world, affecting ourselves. And I also think that, again, we can go too far. Like, one could go too far in terms of paralyzing oneself by being paranoid of actions and thoughts. And that gets into like OCD and people just becoming way too focused on their behavior to the point where they can't really move around in the world. And so that's the other side that also you wouldn't, I think, want to go towards.
You see this in monks sometimes.
Yeah, it can happen in anyone, really. Yeah. I was also thinking of just about this question when I was practicing quite early on. I was at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, and it was raining quite a bit, and I saw a worm kind of on the path, and so I thought, oh, I had some compassion and pulled this worm up because it seemed to be drowning. It was in some water, and it was struggling because the water was moving quite quickly, and so I moved it up onto the land, and I didn't move it. I kind of threw it a bit onto the grass, and lightly, and then immediately a bird came down and picked up the worm and brought it away to eat it. I'm assuming that's what it was doing with it. So I was kind of struck by this, like, oh, what's my negative comment? And again, there was no intention for me to have harmed that worm at all. In fact, it was the opposite, and I didn't intend to feed a bird out of compassion. But there can be some learning in that situation, like, okay, maybe I don't need to, like, if I'm trying to save a worm, like, advertise to some possible watching bird, like, hey, here's a worm, throw it in the air. Or I can kind of more gently put it down in a place that's more protected if that's my intention. So that, I think that's a sort of a good example of that.
Being careful, yeah.
Yeah, just being careful.
Ajahn Sumrit asks, how is the practice... Oh, wait, no. Jacob.
There's one about the books, yeah.
The teaching is widely available today, but how much progress can really be made on the path without real-life exposure to the living Dhamma? Books and videos are inspiring, but can they be enough?
I don't know.
Live streams?
I mean, I think that as the Buddha, almost everyone has heard the sutta where Ananda says the Sangha is half of the holy life, and the Buddha says, no, say that's not so. Ananda, the Sangha is the whole of the holy life. And the Buddha is talking about the living Sangha. And to a greater extent, we could extrapolate that into just all practitioners. But having people who've penetrated the Dhamma and understand the Dhamma and can teach us is surely a way for us to gain much quicker understanding, rather than if we were to only have books. That would be, I think, quite a tough go. I mean, to not have somebody reflect to you, like, where you might be missing something or not understanding something, not seeing things clearly. That's the advantage of having teachers, having a living Sangha, having monks and nuns. And so they're, and just people who are very dedicated to the path who can help us. And without that, I would think the path would be quite difficult. I don't know if I would say impossible, because I think it could be possible for somebody to progress through trial and error with just studying the Buddha's teachings, but surely difficult.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Yeah, I mean, the Buddha said uh, that the uh, food for ignorance was the five hindrances, which were fed by the three forms of misconduct. And then he goes to this list, and at the base of all of it is associating with bad friends. And then he goes through a similar sort of link of supports to true realization and release, and the base of that is associating with good friends. Um, and then in this sutta that Ajahn Chun is referencing, the Buddha also speaks about himself as this as a good friend, that he teaches the way, and this is how it's also the whole of the holy life. So we do have the Buddha in the texts in that sense, and um, there's a really lovely sutta called Vakali in the Samyutta Nikaya, and it's this monk on his deathbed lamenting. The Buddha comes and sees him, and he just laments that he didn't get to see the Buddha more and really missed him. And the Buddha says, "Why are you lamenting not seeing this putrid body, Vakali? Like one who sees the Dhamma sees me." And and it is immediate here and now. So I think really, yeah, like echoing what Ajahn Chunda is saying around the value of being surrounded by fellow practitioners and teachers. I certainly have been deeply impacted by meeting such people. It really shook me, and you sort of, I think some people might know what it means to kind of meet someone whose heart you feel is really really pure, and sort of you fall in love in a certain way. It's a spiritual love, but it's really a profound movement of the heart, and so precious in a life. Um, and if one has had a chance to step into a monastery and sort of be in that environment, similarly, it's so supportive and allows perspective. But but there are teachers who have made it without that, and I think one can. And more than any of that, I mean, if one is dedicated to practice, I think you do as best you can with the resources that are available, especially in an era of COVID. And you put forth the intention on a daily basis. May I meet a good teacher, or may I sort of find my way to a community, and hopefully that intention, as intentions, do, directs one's attention and path through the world in coming days and months to the point where maybe someone does find support and makes room for that in one's life. So yeah, just I'd say you do you do as well as you can with what you have, and um, then if you have a chance to encounter a teacher, then you draw as close as you can, and if you have a chance to encounter a sincere spiritual community, then you immerse yourself as deeply as you can. Um, that's my sense, but I don't think one should become distraught if they just don't have the opportunity. You can practice very well uh, in the situation you're in. And what choice is there really if you don't have a choice?
Yeah, right now there's so much Dhamma available online. So, and
Yeah.
it might not be um, like you're there with a person, especially during the pandemic time. We've seen that, but um, as Nisabho was saying, if one can't be, then I mean, we do actually have like so many recordings of talks and modern understandings of the Buddha being brought into our own language, and just very unique ways of teaching and understanding the Dhamma that's up available for us. So much that I probably at this point there's no way, even in several lifetimes, you could listen to everything that's been put out there. So I think it's important to use those things. I was thinking about like faith type characters and people who really gained so much from faith. They are boosted in terms of their practice by being associated with someone who they have gained faith in and confidence in. So it is quite amazing to encounter people that one truly has an enormous amount of faith in, and pure, that see that purity very clearly. The Buddha did also say this takes a long time actually to truly know someone. And it's easy to judge a book by its cover, but it's not so wise. So sometimes it takes many, many years of living with someone to really to gain that faith as well. So,
Thank you, Ajahn.
yeah.
Uh, Sumrit asks, Dear Ajahn, how is the practice of giving conducive to enlightenment? I read this quote from Ajahn Jayasaro referring to the Anguttara Nikaya, and then he continues down below. When we perform dana with the intention of accruing merit, is that bad intention or greed? Or the bad intention of greed?
Mm.
Ajahn?
Yeah, well, I think about it as letting go, you know. So I know in my own life, you know, when I feel like I want to hold on to something or keep something for myself, that's when my mind is brought to sort of its lowest depth, when that selfishness comes up. And when I exhibit that selfishness in trying to keep something, or not wanting to give something valuable that I have away, or something like that. And that's just, it's pretty clear for me to see the results of that, you know, I did the meditation is quite poor. It's not it's very, it does not lend the mind towards peace and equanimity and, you know, quiet and even clarity, you know, just really seeing and understanding what the Buddha is talking about with desire. Because how can you see desire if you're just completely abandoning yourself to it? So I think the opposite is the aspect of giving, and it doesn't even necessarily have to mean material gifts. It's just that idea of giving, you know, helping, trying to be kind to other people. It can be material, but it can just be just a sense of being helpful to others, and available, and even just offering your non-judgmental attitude, or offering space in a conversation is a type of giving. So all of these conduce towards like just letting go of that self-interested, selfish, self-important intention that many of us have in our own minds. And when we do that, then the Dhamma can kind of it can come in, we can allow it in. Without that, then we essentially block the Dhamma. It's like being selfish is and sort of like miserly is sort of like one of the easiest ways, I think, to just shut it out, because we're kind of going in the opposite direction that the Buddha is suggesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that pointing to it as a letting go at the most fundamental level is true. And, you know, I mean, it can be taken as, because it's of the 10 spiritual perfections, the paramitas, dana is the first. And it can be, especially in Western circles, you know, we are so attracted to these high teachings of wisdom. Some people pass right by that first, and yet, despite being kind of the first on the path, it's not like, or the first paramita listed, it's not less significant. It holds all the others and provides such a foundation. It's such a robust way of letting go of the self, when you just give. I mean, it's an embodied act and really challenges that conceit of this is mine at its deepest level. So, yeah, I think that it does brighten the mind, and a bright mind, the Buddha said, is easily concentrated. And he also spoke about the different motivations of giving in one sutta, and you know, one of them is giving is good, and then one thinks it's tradition, but the highest two motivations are giving as when I give, the mind becomes tranquil and serene. And then the highest one is giving as an ornament of the mind. So in both of those cases, one is very consciously using the act of giving to brighten the mind for the sake of purification. And that's beautiful, but to say that the Buddha frequently referenced the fact that when one gives, one will receive the fruits of that giving, and he didn't shy away from using that motivation. And I find that the power of the act of giving is so strong that even if one has to kind of talk oneself into giving something away, like say, look, this iPod will come back to me in another life or or in the future, whatever. I don't know. But sometimes it does help to talk yourself to yourself in that way, and then you just make yourself give it. And then the act of giving is so beautiful, it kind of overwhelms it. And I think that can be a skillful means sometimes, because sometimes it's quite hard to motivate oneself to give. And so I think it can be skillful, and I don't think I mean, it's not as beautiful a motivation, but certainly one shouldn't devalue an act of giving because it came from that. I mean, you see that in Thailand, or in places with monasteries, is sometimes people will initially come and give sort of big donations to the Sangha as sort of wanting a public image, and really put their name on it. But then they start coming to the monastery more and more because they feel how good it feels, and soon their giving becomes something deeply beautiful at an even more profound level. And you also see it go the other way. People begin with a very wholesome intention, and then it creeps into self-conceit. So one has to watch out for that too. But yeah, I certainly have found that recollections help sometimes when I don't want to give away something. So yeah.
Yeah, just the sense that it's better for you if you do it, and just encourage yourself in that way. I know I grew up with my grandmother, who was a big philanthropist. She gave a lot of money away, and I think there was sometimes a bit of criticism for her for like, actually, she made it quite public sometimes, to make sure people sort of knew about that. I think, but I think that just speaking about that, interestingly enough, there's an encouragement I've been understanding that's going around these days a bit more, that it's one might want to actually talk about how one gives, and it's important to be careful about that, like what one's motivation is around that. But if we hide our generosity from others, because many people have probably heard that it's best to just give anonymously, and I know that biblically is also something that's represented. Just the highest gift is the donor doesn't know you, you don't know the donor, and they benefit, and you don't really have any idea. But when something like that is done, and nobody knows that you're giving, then there isn't that example and that encouragement, from others to see, your example. And so what's something that's kind of being spoken about now with philanthropy is actually letting people know, the fact that, like, Bill Gates has this foundation. It's not like an anonymous foundation, and I think a big part of what he's done is actually to try to get other people to give. And so I also wouldn't encourage people to shy away from sort of making your act of giving something that can encourage others. And of course, we don't want to kind of get into manipulative desires around things that could go the other way in that direction, but just the desire, like, also may my act of giving encourage others to give, so that they can also gain the great fruit of giving. Mm-hmm. And so my mother has also been a very big inspiration for me in that way. She's a true giver, also philanthropist, and very kind in that regard. So, that's a very good lesson. It's been a good lesson to grow up with and to see, and without that, it just might not even be. I mean, I think there's people that just might not even think about giving, really. And so I would encourage, actually, thoughts of giving, and thoughts of why one gives and why it's helpful, and and the fruits of the gift can be in many different ways. The merit that we gain can be dedicated to others at the same time that we're receiving it. So I think it's also important to acknowledge, like that there, like Tan Nisabho is saying, that there is something that we do receive through generosity, and then, kind of like, what do we do with that? We can also give that away, and that's one of the ways we dedicate merit, is like we acknowledge we're getting something, and then we even are willing to give that away. So that's a little bit more in the realm of what the word chaga is expressing, rather than dana. So chaga is not just like a sense of giving, which is more dana, is just more simply based on that. But chaga is actually giving and giving up at the same time. So it's like that quality of, like, you have the fruits of something and you just give more away. So it's a very beautiful thing. It's a path in many religions, but it's quite there can be a lot of pride in the fact that the Buddha, this sort of religion that we've taken on, has that as its core, is being caring for others and taking care of others and giving to others and not being selfish.
Yeah, yeah, and also what you were saying around uh, the giving up and the being the same as giving. I mean, that's the essence of our practice as well, and to not underestimate the gift of being someone who's meditating every day. Like the ripples really do spread powerfully to the people around one, even if one doesn't see, and that's a profound gift. I mean, in you know, uh, there's a term mahadana, the great gift, and that's referred to as one who keeps it's the five precepts. You know, you're giving people the gift of harmlessness, of fear, of not being afraid, and of being able to trust you. And just that alone is an amazing gift. But then, I think it's really important to frame our practice in that way because there is pressure in the world to not, duck out of the party a little early, to go out with your friends when you really know you should be sitting. But to remember that when you pull back, even from people who don't understand and might be annoyed by it, it's actually your most beautiful way of showing love for them. And this is a especially important recollection, say, as a monastic. I mean, we had to step away from so many people in our lives and family and friends, and many of them were quite angry or distraught or confused. And yet, over time, they come around, and some of them do. And even those who don't, I think there's a. It's not like it's lost even on them. And you begin to realize that stepping back is a profound gift to people. And I think framing our practice in that way is important because it helps us hold it well. And yeah, for people to encounter someone in the world who's really paying attention to their heart and to see what that looks like and who's sincere, I mean, that's the greatest gift one can give because one is giving someone back their purpose, and they may have lost it or they may have never known they were missing it. But our essential purpose is to awaken. So, however that happens, so to give someone back that through an example is a profound gift. So yeah, I think contextualizing practice in that way is good, even if it might annoy people at the outset. I know parents have a lot of trouble with seeing their children ordained off the bat usually because they think they're losing them. But generally, parents come around and they there tends to be something really beautiful that forms. I know, despite not seeing my parents as much as I used to, I'm closer than I've ever been to them.
Yeah, it's I think it's incredibly important because we don't think about all of the little things that we do by practicing the Buddha's teachings that actually really do influence other people, and those in our household can be affected, and anyone we have interactions with. I mean, we could actually have changed lives profoundly in just some small act of kindness that we were able to have the clarity to see was the right thing to do in the moment. You hear about this all the time during so many kind of, what the news tends to report is the opposite of these things, all of the many negative things that occur. But it's those positive things that really change our lives so much when we see others doing things. And this comes full circle back into whether books are enough. And yeah, just we do benefit from that encouragement of others on the path. And yeah, I was thinking about when I was a kid. There was a family friend, and he whenever we had like get-togethers with the family, he would always kind of duck out at a certain point and meditate for about an hour in his car. And I'd see him sometimes, and I didn't know what to make of that at the time. I was kind of I didn't know much about meditation at all, and I was a little kid. But what I did admire was the consistency with which he did that, and just like maybe the first few times it was a little weird, but then it was just this normal thing that he did, and it was just very inspiring to me, and just that example later on, thinking about how that motivated me, and one of the many ways that it motivated me to be a monk. It's quite incredible. I mean, I don't think he had any intention of influencing me at all, but he had that influence, and and that was just quite a nice gift. So yeah, that's
It's a really, really valuable story, actually.
yeah, and especially at a time when there was very rare. I mean, to see anybody meditating or to partake in meditation in that time in the 80s or 90s, whenever. So yeah, it's a special memory I had when I was a kid. So what else do we have here?
Well, your mom seems
Happy, yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
So,
And she probably knows what I'm talking about. Actually, interestingly enough, the person I'm talking about was a parent as well, and his son became one of the showrunners of a show I'm not too proud to be associated with, the Game of Thrones. So I've actually, his father's still alive, the producer director of that show. And I've wanted to talk to him and ask him what he's thought about the show, just as a person who's meditated his whole life, just to see like how does something like that really affect the mind if your son is creating it. And it's always just having that person in my life who I wasn't very close with, I didn't have much association with, but just having him consistently there whenever there was a family gathering, and knowing that he did this, I can remind myself to do that, at times when I'm, being social in the monastery, or it's like something I can say, oh, I remember that. That's such a good, diligent thing to do. And we have, of course, influenced each other so much in that way. When I see Nisabho going back to his kuti and he's practicing, or we're going to puja together, all these kind of things, not we, but the figurative we, that's because we're not doing puja here. That's kind of it's just such a special thing to have when other people are inspiring us along the way. I think of like the ideals around like people who are couples for a long time, and how they hopefully that whole path can be a lifelong friendship of just encouragement and kindness. When people have their children, they can encourage their children in the same way. I mean, having children is sort of like I mean, I'm guessing because I don't have any, but I was a kid, and just that, just that the fact that, my goodness, I just spoke to a friend I hadn't spoken to in about 5 or 6 years, and seeing his little kids, we were doing like a video call, and see them kind of coming up to him and saying, "I love you, Daddy," and they were just leaving for school, and it was sort of like, oh wow, that's amazing. Like, just the impact that we can have on other people's lives is so incredible, and that's where generosity is we don't necessarily see all of the things that we're doing that are generous. I mean, my goodness, parents, I mean, it's just like everyday acts and acts of generosity, boundless acts of generosity can occur. And I know I did not, God bless my mother, did not express that much appreciation, and especially as a teenager, there wasn't much appreciation there at all. And unfortunately, that can be pervasive in America.
there's a famous Billy Collins poem named "I Made My Mom a Lanyard." So it's him talking to his mom, and he's like, "Mom, you gave me life, a childhood, you fed me, and I made you a lanyard."
That's right. That's right. I think I gave my mom a couple of things like that too. So, yeah. So it's just important to also recognize our own goodness and generosity that we might not see sometimes. And oh my gosh, there's so many possibilities of things we don't see. Just a choice of not to get angry in a situation, where we could get angry. It's an incredible act of generosity.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, Ajahn. I mean, people are commenting on the grace required to receive a gift, and feel free. We have a few more minutes, so if people want to bring anything up, but yeah, and that's
It's
something
true.
we reflect on a lot as monks is receiving generosity with grace, and you realize as you step into that space that it's not a one-way interaction at all, and it's why it's so hard to explain to people that it's not begging. Like we walk, and if people want to give, they can, but there's both parties step into a field of blessings, and one person is supporting, this symbol of a beautiful aspiration, and there's not a sense of it being a one-way thing at all, and it's just a sacred space. And I think existing in that field of gratitude, that's a different way of conceiving it rather than giving and receiving. And I know I've heard a psychiatrist say that those who those who give sort of compulsively are those who are terrified of not being given to, which I thought was interesting. And then also there's a line from the Screw Tape Letters that Ajahn Amaro references a lot, which is this demon writing letters to his little demon nephew as his little demon nephew tries to convert everyone, and to bring them down to hell. And he speaks about this one woman who was always trying to help people, and the helped had the look of the hunted. And I think that sort of reference to like this compulsive need to just give, and I think if you're in that mindset, it is to slow down, and then that mindset doesn't allow one to receive and humble oneself, and perhaps that is also one of the great benefits of or possible silver linings of growing ill, like Karina's referencing, is that one is forced to learn to receive. And yeah, it is a great gift to allow someone else to give.
Yeah, it goes both ways. I mean, we've talked about that before as well, like giver burnout.
Mm.
So that one, I think it's just a measure, though. It's really to measure what it is one's doing. Because one of the things I had listened to recently was around like giving and taking, and the fact that they're also takers. So if givers can sometimes just keep giving, and takers will just take. They don't have any giving. But most people actually are in the realm of trading. So they're like, I'll scratch your back, you'll scratch mine. They don't like the takers very much because they see it pretty quickly. It's not working out. But givers can unfortunately just keep giving, and so that I think it's important also to a certain degree measure that word that you mentioned was compulsiveness, and I've seen that in myself as well. Just a kind of, if it gets to be a sense of busyness, like for example in a monastery, one can just spend a lot of time being busy, and it can be generous because you're helping out the community, but it also can kind of just go overboard where one's not really taking care of oneself, and it's because the generosity, I think, isn't coming from the right place. It's coming from this like obsessive or compulsive kind of need to act and do and become. So I think it's really important, like generosity, and the Buddha speaks about this so much, that you have to reflect on your own generosity, and you want to actually bring it up to mind. Some people can also just diminish themselves. Oh, I'm not worthy of thinking of these good things about, but yes, no, you are, and you should. So it's important, like even just at the end of the day, to think about all the positive, generous acts that one's done, and that will allow you to sleep well, wake well, and have very good thoughts about other people. So that reflection is quite important, and I would say that if one isn't reflecting on one's own generosity, then you're actually missing out quite a bit on the fruit. And so that's one way to kind of, I think, avoid that compulsiveness, is to remind yourself of what you're actually doing.
Great.
Yeah. But I also think something we haven't talked a lot about, but it's very true. Like we need to be able to receive gifts, and it's so easy to kind of, no, not me, that's okay, or I don't need that, and it's not. We're often not thinking of the giver. we're often not being generous with the giver. We're kind of just thinking about ourselves, and we don't want to be seen as a taker, or we want to be independent. But it's important to actually think, like, whenever somebody wants to give, if they have the means to give that thing, and it's not causing them a great hardship to give something, then it's important to honor that. As you, I think you used the word honor, and that gift is very important to receive, so that you allow that person to gain the fruits for their own generosity. And I think that's important to reflect about too, that we're not actually refusing things and forgetting the other person there.
Yeah, learning to say thank you and accept it.
Yeah.
I think that's about our time limit.
Very good. Yes. I hope that was a good discussion for everyone. It was very nice for me. Hope it was good for you.
It was likewise. It's good.
Yeah, very good.
It's always nice to tap into this community. So
Yeah. And speaking about generosity is one of those topics of conversation that Buddha brought up. Is there's nothing bad about it. It's only good. So be well till our conversation next week, and we'll see you on Friday. Otherwise, have a good, pleasant